First of all, I want to get away from the dictionary definition of a constitution. A constitution must have purpose, and the purpose must be to create a nation that conduces to the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. That is what a constitution must be. And having set the objective of the constitution, you then frame a constitution to achieve that objective.
Because we really do have a race problem. Those divisions are real. We see it in our politics, we see it in our trade union. We see that they take the divisions with them. Look at where people live in this US. You have enclaves in the Bronx and in Richmond Hill and in Brooklyn. They're taking the division with them.
Women are dying in the streets, and we have a government pontificating running around campaigning for women's vote. No women should vote in this election coming up unless there is something done to the legislation as Magistrate Kim is advocating.
That voices like ours that are not in the political trench fighting it out, voices like ours should become stronger. One of the things about the Caribbean is that we have never had one discourse. Bass will know the days of the New World and the Old World and the radical left and so on. What we had was this concourse of ideas, which I think in the early days of independence pushed us in a certain direction. We've got to move back to that point of having these multiple discourses.
A pleasant good afternoon to all our Globespan viewers on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. And we all know that we're here in New York at our studio, and summer has just begun on Friday, and it's been a beautiful, beautiful weekend. And I'm so glad to introduce to you today a very important topic, sexual harassment in the workplace. And I know some of you who are tuning in might be able to identify with this in some shape or form, whether you are an employer or an employee. But today, allow me to introduce our guests for today's segment. We have next to me, on my right, is the beautiful Audace Garnett. And Audace grew up in Guyana, but migrated to the United States as a child. So Michelle and I, who you're gonna meet in a minute, we were just discussing we need to get Audace back to Guyana.
Yes.
So, and then we have Michelle Nichols, who has been one of our first guests on the program. And we had a very interesting topic on that program. So you'll get to hear what both of these beautiful women are doing. And it's very important when we empower each other. So this is about women empowering women. So, and they're doing fantastic things independently and collectively, so you'll hear a little bit about that. So before we begin, I'm gonna ask them to just share a little bit about themselves and their individual organizations and companies that they're doing work with. So let's start with Audace. Let's start with you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dianne, and thank you to the Globespan family for providing this opportunity and this platform to speak about this issue that is extremely prevalent within our society. Again, my name is Audace Garnett. Born in Guyana, raised in the United States, and I've spent most of my career working directly with victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and sex trafficking. I currently train nationally. I work for a nonprofit where I look at the intersection between technology and abuse. And I started my nonprofit, Ascension Advocacy and Consulting, in December 2017, based out of the need from my community, just to discuss things such as sex trafficking, sexual assault, and domestic violence, things that our community needs to hear. So I train inside of schools, I talk to young people, I go into churches, and speak wherever my voice is needed. So thank you again, Dianne.
Thank you. Michelle?
Good afternoon. My name is Michelle A. Nicholas. I am the founder and CEO of the Nickel Consulting Group, which focuses on providing strategic marketing opportunities, strategic management, personal development, and branding for corporations, government, and individuals. I'm also the founder and president of Sexual Assault and Family Education Guyana, which focuses on individuals who are victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, and struggling with mental health. And I am the executive director of Girls Inc. Westchester, which focuses on inspiring girls to be strong, smart, and bold. That's it in a nutshell.
Awesome.
Beautiful. So these are amazing, empowering women. We're all doing fantastic things, whether it's in New York, London, Guyana, Trinidad, Canada, or across the globe. And if you're doing something phenomenal, please let us know. Hit us up on the Globespan 24x7 Facebook page. Let us know what you're doing, and you can be a part of this conversation. So again, let me introduce myself. My name is Dianne Madray from Let the Women Speak Project. And as you know, Globespan has been expanding the network across the globe. We're increasing the 3 Ds, and that's dialogue, debate, and discussion. Today, as we speak about the sexual harassment approach in terms of what's happening, whether it's in New York or across the globe, this has triggered a conversation as a result of the airport in Guyana and some, I'm going to say this like this, allegations that were made. So my colleagues and friends here, Michelle and Audace, we had this conversation in terms of preparing for this program. And we're not lawyers, we're not experts, we're not giving advice. So this is about education and sensitization to our women across the globe, particularly our sisters in Guyana. And in terms of what are some of the things we need to look at as women in terms of what's a compliment compares to harassment. So we're going to continue this conversation alongside with our guest in studio, and also you, the viewers that are tuning in. The whole idea of this program is to bring you in with us and have this conversation together. So are you ready? Join us now in this conversation in terms of how can we begin to look at sexual harassment in the workplace, and why are so many women suffering, particularly in silence. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this. Also, it's important for all our women. And the ladies and I, we had our conference calls talking about this in terms of all women. And it's not just women in the CEOs or in corporations and stuff like that, but these are domestic workers and other women. Michelle, remember we were having this conversation. What are some of the other women you would say that would fit into this category?
I actually would say that we just have to do women in general. The reality is that whether you are a CEO of a Fortune 500 company or you are a woman working in a mom and pop shop down the street, sexual harassment happens all over. It happens every day. And the reality is that there's not enough conversation back home, where there should be a lot of conversations happening. But it's really, in a lot of ways, it goes back to what we were brought up to understand, what our culture really is, and what we were kind of taught was okay. You're walking down the street and the guy does something, it's kind of like okay, and we just have to be in that space where we're ready for change. It is not okay for a woman who, or a young person working for an organization who feels as though they have to leave their job because they're being told something sexually, they're being groped physically, they're being certain things like certain photos, they're being shown on their on the phone or being emailed. All of those things constitute sexual harassment. And at the end of the day, if we don't feel safe in the space that we're working, then why would we want to go to work? The workplace is completely affected. And so in a lot of ways, we need to start having those conversations early on. And that's where human resources comes in, and where human resources should be an asset, a friend, but that's something I'm sure we're going to find space to discuss before we end.
Absolutely. And Audace, why don't we talk about, maybe touch on the employer aspect of sexual harassment?
Yes. So it's really interesting that you bring up HR, because even here in the United States, where things are pretty progressive, and in states like New York, there are many states where, things are not implemented, and, a person that's being victimized may not feel comfortable with going to HR because of retaliation, and that's everywhere. However, things can be put in place by HR, but it's important that we implement them and enforce them. So there needs to be a consequence that happens if something is going to be put in place, and that needs to happen, from the front door to the back office. So everyone needs to understand that this is not acceptable. And there'll be some consequence as a result of this type of behavior happening.
Absolutely. And we should all know, whether you're an employee or an employer, that employers have an obligation to keep their employees safe and to provide a work environment that is free of discrimination. So as you're tuning into the Globespan 24/7 program right now, sexual harassment in the workplace, please hashtag stop sexual harassment. And we're going to touch on the articles that have been running pretty much all week on Kaichor that, you know, the two women and myself have been following. And I'm sure many of you have seen this. We haven't seen any other news agencies in Guyana touching on this. But so, and again, let's keep in mind, it's allegations, right? Yes. So I just want to make a note from one of our previous guests who I had spoken with earlier this week. She was the author from Good Wife and the Other Woman, Kenise Etwaru. And Kenise is in the human resources as well. And she informed me that, as we're in New York, that within her field of work, and here, was very interesting, within her field of work in New York, and I think this is also stemmed from the Me Too movement, that she had 42 harassment training for CEOs and lay staff, and it's now June, right? 42 cases like that. So now we know that, and you ladies would attest within your companies that you're working with or worked with, that it's mandated in New York. So those of you who are tuning in, why don't you hit us up and tell us what's happening in your state or your country with mandated laws and sexual harassment and bullying in the workplace. Tell us what's happening, and let's continue the conversation on that. Can we hit up the first slide? And let's have a conversation about this with our viewers tuning in and with our guests. What do you know about sexual harassment? So here it is. Ladies, let's have a look at this and let's see if we can get our viewers and our audience to tune in. What do we know from basic things about sexual harassment? Can we just discuss that?
Sure. So just a basic definition about what sexual harassment is. It's any unwanted or unwelcome sexual advance, whether it be verbal, visual, or physical, that you did not welcome, you don't want, that's happening in the workplace. And it usually creates a hostile work environment, an uncomfortable feeling, uncomfortable place and space to be at in the workplace. So that's the basic definition that I wanted to just put out there before we move forward.
And I think also as we discussed a bit earlier, it is important for us to understand that sexual harassment is not a one sex, a one gender conversation. Males are also victims of sexual harassment. And so, again, it is unwanted. Yes. And so at the end of the day, if once we are able to educate ourselves, once we are able to educate others of what that is, of what that unwelcomeness really is, I think our conversations change. A lot of things that we, it's at the end of the day, it's all about awareness. So when we are able to understand that these are the things that can and cannot happen, or should and should not happen, it just changes our conversation. It just makes us look at things definitely differently.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you ladies a personal question, and if it's okay, right? Mm-hmm. Have either of you experienced any sexual harassment, in the workplace? Growing up or?
Well, I've experienced street harassment and other forms of sexual harassment, not in the workplace. I've worked for large organizations that fortunately implemented these policies. There were rules in the handbook. We had trainings during orientation, so I'm grateful for that. However, I know of friends and people that have had these experiences. I've worked with clients that have had these experiences, so it's extremely prevalent just because I didn't, have that directly happen to me.
Well, unfortunately, I experienced it directly happening with me back home, and it opened my eyes. I made the decision to leave the organization because I love me, and I value me, and I'm worth much more than what was being promised. I'll tell you that. So I made that decision, but how many others could have made that decision? Not many at that time. And then once that happened, I was able to utilize that experience to educate others. And even today in the work that I do, I am still working with individuals who are going through that. We're talking about girls coming out of high school who are looking for employment and who are promised jobs, and once they're promised this job and they get in there, it takes roughly about a month, and then the comments start, then the conversation starts happening, etc., and you're actually trapped. I mean, I was mentioning this morning, think about a mother who has 5 babies at home, a single mom who has 5 babies at home and needs this job. So it's kind of like this thing, well, you know what, I can just take it. I don't have to do certain things. I'll just take it. So going back to the question, if you think that it's going to stop, actually it won't, because of the fact that this individual starts feeling as though they have power over you. And even in with the males, when they're at work, somebody passes and touches the little backside, or kind of brings certain things, it is still unwelcome, and we have to be able to stop it.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Michelle. And as you, the viewers, are tuning in, and you see us sitting here, and looking at us and in our perspective in terms of the work that each of us are doing, some of us might say, like, women like us might not go through stuff like that. And thank you, Michelle, for touching on that. So I just want to just add real quickly, and not just to keep the focus on me. I too experienced that when I was younger. And actually it wasn't in Guyana, because I grew up here and working my first job, working in a large corporation right here in New York. And it's interesting when you have a vice president of a company, tells you that, oh, I remember what you wore the first time you interviewed, for the job, and make promises in terms of what can happen and so on in terms of your job. And like Michelle, I mean, when you're young and in your 20s, you get scared, you don't understand the aspect of sexual harassment. Even if you're coming with a background like mine in social work and mental health, these were things that weren't talked about much back in the 80s. And what did I do? As Michelle, I quit. Never talked about it, and I think it was years after I mentioned to one of my brothers who actually worked with the company who got me that job. So yes, it does happen. So one of the things that I wanted to mention, even with that article that we've been talking about in Culture News, why is it that young women, like young women, not like us, but that went through, and we're talking about that article, and again, allegations, yes. It's so important. Evidence is so important. Mm-hmm. So ladies, can we talk about that? So as we're educating and sensitizing our women that are tuning in, that might be silent, in this conversation, what are some of the things maybe we can tell them as women from our experience?
Okay, number one, you're not alone, okay? What you're experiencing is not something that you're experiencing by yourself. Help is available. There are so many resources and people that you can talk to. We have a network here that we could connect you to. And, help is available. You just need to know that help is available, and you don't have to experience this on your own. What I would also say is that I know that, going through this type of situation is extremely traumatizing. But what you could start to do is document stuff. So write down every time an incident happened, write that down so that, you can have it, safely kept in a notebook or something, so that if you have to recall the incident, you have it there. If you have a colleague that is also experiencing it in the space, connect with them and talk to them and see what they're doing about it, so that you all can band together and stand together. If HR does plan to move forward and do something about it. That's my piece.
Michelle,
I'm right here. I'm right here, like all three, because the biggest thing is documenting. So often that these things happen, and we may tell a friend, which is really good that we've been able to share, because that friend can be our our witness, etc. But write it down. There is no better witness than you. Yes. because you were there. You can write everything that person said to you, how they said it, when they said it, what time it was, all of that. And when it's fresh in your mind, when it just happened, sometimes it just happened, it's so traumatizing that you're going to take a second, but carry that pen and pad. I tell everybody, even my staff members, do not come to see me without a pen and a pad, because you need to write stuff down. We always think we'll remember. Put it on paper, because there's so much that you can get out of that. 2 mornings from now, when you're called and when the evidence has to be presented, you have that. You and that's the thing. Your perp won't. You do. So, you know, I am all for writing stuff down. Use your connections as resources. And again, there are others like you out there, and you've seen it. You just need one person to stand up and say it doing the same thing or doing the same thing. There's this thinking of the first follower. You know, everybody wants to be the leader, but think about it. A leader doesn't stand alone. The leader has followers. Be that first follower. Help others. Yes. Connect. Yes. You'll see the impact.
Ladies, what about in terms of parents, right? Mm-hmm. Especially parents with girl children. And we have fathers in our audience who have girl children, and we probably have fathers who are tuning in, you know, who might have seen this article, and especially in Guyana, to have a young daughter growing up and then getting ready to go out in the workforce. Mm-hmm. You know, what do you tell your child, what, you know, in situations like that? Maybe we can have, you know, I don't know if our men would care to say anything from our audience. Right. I see. They're ignoring us at the moment. So if those of you who are tuning in, I think we have someone in the back. Do we have a microphone that we can, we have someone that will make comment? Because it's important for fathers to be in this conversation. Yes. So we have one of our guests in studio.
Oh, sorry. I have 2 daughters, and since the age of 3 years old.
He's kind of tall. Yes, now we can see him.
Okay. So I have 2 daughters, and both of them, since the age of 3, I have always warned them of people touching them in the wrong places. And if they do, let myself know, let the mother know, let somebody know. Do not be afraid of that person. If that person tells you, don't say nothing because I'm going to hurt your father, I'm going to hurt your mother. Let them try to hurt me. I'm pretty big.
And that's, yeah, don't mess with him. You see his size?
Let them try to hurt me, because that's one of the intimidations that these perps try to influence these children and to scare them. Don't. Yeah. Teach your child at very early age to defend themselves, to talk, and when they get older, put them in some kind of defense class. That way they could really hurt the person.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, let's not be too violent. We need to have a conversation. I think we have a very good friend of mine, Suresh Sagrim from the Humanitarian Mission in Berbice. Suresh, thank you so much for joining us. And actually, Suresh has been here all weekend. He's here for his daughter's wedding next week. Nice. And we've actually been spending the whole weekend doing stuff together. You know, when I said doing stuff, let me just clarify that. We attended, before I get myself in trouble. We attended an event that one of my brothers, Ravi, had earlier on Friday, which was a networking. We'll do more of that. And then yesterday we participated in a mental health training. And today I've invited him to join us. So, Suresh, yes, let's have your input on that.
Thank you so much. I will share my experience as a single parent. Had full custody for my daughter after fighting a battle with the Hague International Convention and the US government. As a child growing up, I always say to my daughter, don't allow anyone to touch you. And even though she went to school and the teacher or the nurse may want to touch her, the nurse would have to call me because my daughter would rebel and says, my father says, nobody should touch me. And I had a conversation with Dianne and myself over the weekend, is that we need to look at the perpetrators and where we leave our kids. And the perpetrators are the one from within our family circle and the one from our immediate friendship and friends. The perpetrator is not coming from the outside. So my message to you in the sexual harassment, parents, start to invest and take care of your children. At times, we tend to left our responsibilities for someone else while we are busy with our investment. And in sexual harassment, very quickly, Dianne and the two other guests, I am a man, and I do understand what's going on in sexual harassment and the workforce. But I also want to say, and I'm not here to combat with any one of you ladies because you're powerful, but what I want to say is that there are a lot of innocent men is in jail right now. And there is a lot of guilty men that is walking the street. You and I know that there are many consensual sexual relationships that a woman will say yes, and something happens along the line, and the relationship went bad, and the next thing you know is rape. Thank you.
That's,
Okay, couple of things.
I think
Couple of things.
that you just started a conversation there.
Yeah.
Michelle, I saw your reaction, so you want to go first?
Yes.
Okay, you saw my reaction. Okay. So first of all, I want to acknowledge the two males that got up and spoke. So grateful that you have been so inspiring and empowering for your daughters. I think in a lot of ways, and I just want to go back, that sexual harassment is not just about women. I have a 13-year-old boy, and so I always try to make sure that I pivot that conversation. It's on both sides. So I'm having the conversation with my 13-year-old about what's not to touch and what he can touch, etc. Because he is in a class with other girls, with other guys. And we know in this day and age, there is it's not just by looking at somebody that you can determine their orientation. There's a different conversation happening altogether. So, you know, it has to be a conversation on both sides, both male and females. Attacking or addressing the conversation on their innocent individuals who are currently incarcerated. This we know, whether it is for allegations of sexual assault or it's for murder or other various allegations. But I think the thing that we also have to address is what exactly are we stating in our HR manuals? What are we mentioning when our employees are coming in? I'm going to use big banks. Banks have a clear policy that if there is going to be any form of relationship between employees, especially when it's a senior and a junior, they cannot be working in the same section. They have to switch. And those are the things that need to be happening. Those are the conversations that we need to have happen. Because we all know that people connect, there's chemistry, etc. But there needs to be clear rules and clear understanding. Now, what the question was, what do we say to our girls or what do we say to our children?
Parents. The
Parents say to their children. We first have to tell our children how much they are worth. Our children need to know and believe that they are important.
Yes.
Because if they don't know that they're important, when they go out there in the world, somebody else is going to tell them that they're important. Somebody else is going to be telling them certain things, and we as parents need to have those realistic conversations with our children, because sexual harassment is not just happening in the workplace. It is happening in our religious spaces. It is happening in our schools. It is happening in our community centers. It is happening all over.
Preach it, Michelle.
Absolutely.
Testify. So I'm saying that as parents, even if you have experienced it for yourself, don't let it be a cycle.
Right.
Speak to your children, tell your children, Don't have anybody touching you. Speak to your children. Tell them, look, if somebody offers you something in exchange for something, come and tell me about it. Because that's kind of like one of the biggest thing. If you give me this, I'll give you that. Or your mom is not working well, your mom is not doing well, I can offer this, all of that. And unfortunately, we do know that we do have some of our parents who actually allow their children to be part of those conversations. And to those parents, I say it to you, I'm sorry that you have had to face what you've had to face. I am sorry that you believe that that might be the right choice, but I am telling you it's the wrong one. Because the trauma that you are putting on your child, what will happen is that if they are part of that conversation, believe you me, chances are very high that your grandchildren will also be part of that conversation.
Oh, you said so much. I don't even know where to jump in on that. But yes, I want to. Is this mic on? Okay. I'd like to commend the two men that stood up as well and spoke about their experiences with their children. And the problem is, within this movement, it's mostly women speaking up. We need to have more men involved, more men engaged, saying, hey, what you're doing is not okay. We don't tolerate that in our church. We don't tolerate that, in our workplace. And once men start doing that, I think that these numbers would come down drastically, and maybe more survivors would speak out. When it comes to children, I have a 6-year-old myself, and I've been talking to her about good touch and bad touch since she was able to talk. I think it's really important to talk to children about consent, because a lot of times, as the gentleman mentioned, it's not the person that's hiding behind the bush or the dumpster that's going to sexually assault you. It's usually a family member or someone that's close to you, like a coach or a rabbi or a pastor. So it's important that we talk about that so that they understand that, giving someone a hug is okay if you consent to it. And it's important that we let parents know that children should have the right to, either give a high five, a hug, or just wave and say hello. You shouldn't force a child to, engage with someone that they don't feel comfortable with engaging with. Okay, so that's my little spiel.
Thank you, ladies. And thank you, gentlemen, for, tuning in with us in terms of from the fathers, from fathers who have daughters. So it's so important. I mean, I have my little niece sitting in the audience here, and she's smiling. So it's important to, as you said, teach our young girls in terms of touch and so on. Or be like what my brother does. He picks the phone up and calls me and say, hey, you need to talk to so-and-so. So it's all right, because sometimes you have other family members that can, help out in that situation too, especially with our men or single fathers who are not able to do it alone. I have friends who actually reach out to me to do that sort of thing. So let's talk about what the difference between a compliment and sexual harassment. Because let's say if you walk into the workplace and, you walk in with a skirt and so on, and, it's a little bit above your knees, and, your boss says, good morning, hey, sexy.
Not
ladies?
Appropriate.
Compliment or sexual harassment?
I'll let you tackle that, but that's not appropriate.
I would accept the hey sexy, the hey gorgeous, the hey beautiful if you are with me. You're not with me. We're working together. You are my supervisor, you are my boss, you are my colleague, etc. It's kind of like how today we have this way that we approach probably some of our girlfriends, and we say, hey, B. And for some people that's appropriate, and for others that may not be appropriate. I mean, for me it's not appropriate, but that's on one side of the conversation. This is a no-brainer. If I'm coming into work and you see me with my well-clad suit, I'm looking right. I checked myself in the mirror this morning and I was looking fine, and all you can say to me is, hey, sexy, I'm sending you to HR. You and I are going to have this long conversation, because please understand that there's a reason that my name is Michelle A. Nicholas. I would prefer you either address me as Michelle, Miss Nicholas, Mrs. Nicholas, or you can bring the whole country and say Michelle Althea Nicholas. I don't mind, but sexy was never a part of that name. So until that we can clarify that, it's going to be a problem for me.
Thank you so much. Michelle, you and I both know Avia Marie Lindy, who runs Metro. So I wanted to, can we just hold this for a minute? Avia runs Metro in Guyana, and Metro has many offices across, and she has employees. So Avia, if you have access to a phone, you know where you are, I'm not sure where you are at the moment, and she said a timely and much needed discourse on sexual harassment. So thank you so much for tuning in with us, Avia. And if you have any thoughts on that, could you give us a call? So if you can hear this now, please give us a call on our Guyana number. Could we hit up the numbers on screen so we could have our viewers tuning in? So yes, Avia, how about you? I'm sorry.
I'm
still doing
That's fine. That's okay. That's
Same
okay.
last name.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much more to say. As
Yeah.
Nicole spelled
Yeah.
it all out. That is not appropriate and not okay. There need to be boundaries.
Well, I just want to come back to something, Michelle, you said that working in Guyana, because you came here a little bit older than Audace and I, and I remember us having this conversation, the three of us, and you mentioned that about the policies.
Yes.
We won't call the names of the institution, but can we talk about that? Because I have someone in audience, I want to make some points on that will go after you.
So I'm here, yes. So when I started working for one of the ministries, there was no welcome and orientation. There was no employee handbook, so we can have a conversation on, sexual harassment. All there was this is your job, this is what you need to do. And the reality is that's what you were looking for. You're looking for a job, you wanted to get employed, and you wanted to make money. But there was no part in that says I wanted to be employed. I wanted you to tell me certain things or address me in a particular way. I know that times have changed, and I know that there's been conversation recently. There are organizations now who are providing those orientations and stuff like that. But the reality is that sometimes, unfortunately, they are senior officials in the company that are perpetrating certain acts. And so HR may not understand what their role is if they're not very clear about their roles. And so what tends to happen is the victim may feel violated because they have said something and nothing is happening. So then if it's a bunch of us that have been assaulted or we've had cases on sexual harassment by this particular individual, and I come over and I say, what happened to your case? And she's like, nothing happened. Then why would I want to go and report? So the reality is that I know in my time, I didn't feel as though I could have reported anything. So the thing for me was to walk away for my dignity. However, if I knew that if there was something for me to be able to do at that particular time, if there was opportunities for me, I know that I would have pursued them, but there was nothing available for me at that time.
Okay, great. So, I mean, it's important in terms of the policies and stuff. Ladies, we talked about the articles because we were monitoring them through the course of the week in Kaichor News. And again, I'm bringing this to the attention of our viewers also, allegations, because until this come forward and the women who have made these allegations come forward to us, we won't mention any names. Can we talk about those articles that are running by the media in terms of how those articles were addressed? Because we discussed that in our conversation. Audace, you wanna?
I'll defer to you on that.
You know this, she just gives the So I have read all of the articles, and I love the fact that you're using alleged because they are alleged. I'm very big on those things. I've read the articles, and for anyone who feels as though they've gone through something like that, I encourage you to share with somebody that you believe that you can share with. I have read in detail every single article that's been published thus far. I've noticed that a couple of things stand out to me. One of those things was, I think it was the police chief, if I'm not mistaken, mentioned, or someone, I can't say police chief, the police mentioned that the organization should have brought the complaint to them. And I think that is very, very important for that to be stated, because when those things happen, when an allegation of this nature is made, it should require the attention of the legal side, which would be whether it's the law or the order, but it should not be, especially if you do not have the HR infrastructure ready and set and the policies in place, you should hand it off. It should not be something that you do internally if you are not in that space to work on something like that. And I mean, I understand that, you know, folks may want to take it, kind of do an internal investigation. I get that completely, and this is not for me to say yes, no, maybe. I am just reacting to what I read, and that for me is give it to somebody who can handle the situation as opposed to trying to do it on your own. And this could be a lesson for not just the agency in question, but it could be a lesson for all of our agencies across Guyana, because it is not acceptable. We should not accept it. We have our young women, we have our young men, we have so much happening in our community today. We have the domestic violence, we have the sexual assault. I mean, we have a lot. This should not, we don't want this.
And in terms of the articles that have been running in Kite News, and Michelle, I mean, because we discussed this, one of the things I think was troubling for me, and you ladies can tell me how you feel, and working with HR components. And as I said to our viewers earlier, this is just for information and education purposes from us. We are not lawyers in terms of providing legal advice. But what we will do, a second segment on this, we will be bringing in HR persons. I was expecting someone in audience today, but they're not here as yet. And I'm not sure if they're still going to be coming in. So we will do a second segment on the education component and the legal and ethical aspect of this. So if any of you have any thoughts or ideas, please send them to us on this, and don't forget to click like on the Globespan 24x7 page. So yes, as I was saying regarding the article, the thing that was troubling for me, Michelle and Audace, I don't know if you ladies remember seeing this, that when it was reported, the one of the young ladies in the article from Kite stated that she received a text. Mm-hmm. I don't know, I think because we live here and North America mentality might be different. I'm not saying that we are better than anyone, but I don't think an employer here, you know, would respond in a text, you know? Right. So either of you ladies care to?
So from what I recall in the article, yes, she did receive a text message, and I think she was kind of taken aback as to how this person got her personal phone number, which is another, you know, scary thing, thinking that this person has access to your address, your phone number, they could respond and retaliate, and that's another barrier to reporting, because you don't know what this person can do because they, you know, now have access to all of this information. So yeah, that's...
No, but also what about the text that came from HR, because there was a text also from HR.
Oh, I didn't.
Yeah, there was a text from the HR that.
So whether you are living in North America or South America, mm-hmm. there is no text from HR. When there is an issue, there is a letter. I can take an email, but there is no text. That goes without saying that should not happen. And I think we also read that the alleged victim no longer has access to her workplace or something to that effect.
Right, yes.
That's another thing that precludes victims from sharing, because this is my income here. Right. And so I am now looking at the fact that if I report, how am I going to take care of myself? How am I going to take care of my family? And these are kind of like the things that make the perpetrator is kind of empowered, right? Hold you by the jugular, because they're saying that, you know what, if you report, I know that you need this, or you're not going to get paid, and because all of these things, of someone reporting something like this as the victim, allegedly, should not be suspended, should not be, should still be able to work unless they have indicated that the work environment is, they feel unsafe and do not want to be in place. And again, it goes back to the HR policies, the HR requirements, what's happening in there, and that's why this is a bigger conversation. It is not just what an HR company puts in place, and definitely you can talk on this one. It's not just what they put in place. It is what is legal, what are the regulations that they can work through.
But to touch on what you just said earlier before Michelle tuned in, about, that the text messaging which can retaliate. Because Kenisa Dwaru, when we spoke about the policies for New York, she and I talked about, with Let the Women Speak, we're asking women to speak out. Right. But what if they speak out and then they're retaliated against, as you were saying? Right. And then, we have more deaths. We have the deaths with the domestic violence cases. Now we have deaths with sexual harassment cases. I mean, we haven't seen that yet, and I hope that doesn't happen. Yes.
Actually, in the article, one of the alleged victims did mention that this person that sexually harassed her said that she'd never be able to work in this industry again. She'll never be able to get this type of job again. And she struggled to find employment for a very long time. And eventually someone did give her the opportunity and, hired her. But it's very real and it's scary. Yeah. So I definitely understand why people, remain quiet.
Yeah. So, Audace, let's talk about, because we were talking about this, so you can address this. What can the bystanders in cases like this do?
Okay, so in New York we have a slogan: if you see something, say something. And it came right after 9/11, for folks that are seeing things that are suspicious. But I would say the same thing for people in the workplace who are witnessing these type of incidents happen to their colleague. You may be fearful of going forward to HR or, speaking up loudly in a meeting or saying something. But if you can stand in solidarity with that victim, I mean, simply going to them saying, I see what's happening, what you're experiencing is not okay, there's help available, just letting them know to what extent you can support them, that can do so much, and you have no idea, because we have a culture of silence in our community where we know things are happening. We know that, particular individuals within, certain spaces are being abusive, and we don't say anything. But it's important that we speak up, because the impact of sexual trauma and sexual harassment is extremely great. One of the alleged victims talked about having to take sleeping pills now as a result because she's so traumatized. So depression, anxiety, just being fearful of going outside, being fearful of authorities now as well. So it's important that we say something and let folks know that they're not alone.
I'm so glad you touched on that, because one of the things that I wanted to bring up here is the effects of sexual harassment on employees. And when you talk about the trauma that comes after, I think we don't seem to, employees may not realize that, or employers may not think what they're doing could have long-term impact on the employees. Yes. Michelle, what are some of the things from a clinical perspective you can see, like emotional stress? What are some other things you think might? I
don't think we have enough time, unfortunately. As much as the victim is faced with going through sexual harassment, I would like us to think about how we behave to those victims. Because more times than not, if you see that an employer or a supervisor or a manager is paying a little bit of extra attention to that particular employee, we automatically assume that that attention is wanted by that victim. And we don't take the time to have the conversation with them. What we do is that we stigmatize them. And we start saying, well, that's how she got up. That's what she did, whatever. This victim may have been promoted, but you don't know what was happening. You don't know why they're still in that job and what is happening. So I always say, like, before you jump that rope, hold on. Let's see first. Because the impact for somebody who goes through sexual harassment, I will tell you, for me, I do not sit where I am backing the exit. When I walk into an office, when I walk into a building, I need to see where my exit sign is. And I do not back my exit. Even in my own office, I have to see the exit. It's very important. So for me, and for so many others who have been traumatized, the reality is it is not just something that happens and you run from it. It is something that has happened, and you have a constant reminder. And if you are not prepared, if you don't have the opportunity to heal, or you're not part of that process of healing, then there will things that's going to happen that will trigger you, and you will not be able to hold on to your job. And if you don't hold on to your job, how will you be taking care of family? How will you be taking care of yourself? So speak up. If you see something, say something. Please try really, really hard not to stigmatize. Instead, ask questions, because there's a lasting effect. And it's not just to the victims, but it can be a lasting effect for those who are watching it all play out.
Absolutely. And let me just add to that in terms of the effects of sexual harassment that can occur. It's emotional stress, because let's say if you're going through something like this and then you have to leave a job, you don't know what could happen, physically, because that trauma can sometimes hit you without even fully understanding it. Feelings of humiliation, anger, powerlessness, depression. Some people can go through depression, and especially if, the people around you, as you indicated, Michelle, like families, let's say you decide to quit your job, but no one knows why you quit. Your parents don't know. And you start to get physically ill, fatigue, and so on, and it's coming from the trauma of that sexual harassment. So it's very important in a clinical perspective to speak to someone, and as the lady said, if you see something, do something, and try to seek counseling, because even with that could create an impact of long-term effects for trauma. So I'm going to ask someone from our audience, can we get a microphone? Stephen, you're going to mention some of the things that in terms of Guyana. Stephen is my young research assistant. So you're going to highlight some of the things that you were able to pull up for us, for our audience, right?
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Danny. And like much of your comments there on Facebook, I believe it's an issue that is very rampant, not just here in the United States, but it's something that that's plaguing our home country there back in Guyana. And it's a discussion that's very timely and very needed as well. There is a very detailed definition for sexual harassment, and it goes like this. Sexual harassment is defined as any unwanted or unwelcome verbal, visual, nonverbal, or physical conduct that is of a sexual nature that is imposed upon an individual in a very severe or passive manner that triggers discomfort and may even trigger hostility in a place of environment. The reality of this is that many people may not be able to distinguish between what's a compliment and what is actually deemed as sexual harassment in the workplace. And as such, many people are being sexually harassed verbally without not even knowing it, that they're victims already of sexual harassment in the workplace. And they wait until words and audible words and things that are being uttered, they eventually escalate to physical stuff. Just like verbal abuse, it escalates to physical abuse and something further. So with regards to the whole context there in Guyana, there are legal provisions. While some people might want to stay silent, and I really hear you spoke very passionately about the whole issue of sexual harassment in the workplace. And while people would want to stay silent because of a fear of losing their job or because of a fear of further victimization or what's not. But I really hear you when you mentioned about not be so quick to judge or so quick to speak ill of an individual, or if you see some closeness going on, because there might very well be something going on there and that person is so suppressed to the point where he or she does not utter anything, but there could very well be some instance of sexual harassment going on there. There is an issue there in Guyana, or there's actually an act in our constitution in Guyana.
Yeah, talk about that act.
The Prevention of Discrimination Act of 1997. And in that act, there is a certain clause that speaks specifically to sexual harassment. And our Guyanese brothers and sisters, you know, our females especially, and we're very cognizant of the fact that it's not just women and girls who can fall victim to sexual harassment, but it's our men and boys in the workplace as well who can very well become victims of sexual harassment in the workplace. So while we encourage everyone to speak out against it, and if something of a sexual nature is being spoken to you, or a sexual act has been imposed upon you in the workplace, it is absolutely important to speak. And yes, there are legal provisions in our laws, you know, to protect you and for you to help fight your case or what's not. But there's always been an issue with regards to an act and just a clause in an act. An act has more power. And so there's a body there in Guyana called the Women and Gender Equality Commission, who just posted a report, I think it was just last year, with regard to sexual harassment in the workplace. And part of that report spoke explicitly of the issue of sexual harassment being overlooked and the fight for an act to be enshrined in our Constitution that will speak directly to sexual harassment, and sexual harassment in the workplace is often being overlooked, and therefore it is imperative that we raise our voices and ensure that our lawmakers and our legislators know that this is an issue, and it's an issue that bothers us, it's an issue that affects us, and it's an issue that needs attention, and it's an issue that should be addressed with some sense of urgency. Reason being, you mentioned our newspaper articles, you know, of these allegations, right? These are just allegations. And I'm very certain that there might be genuine cases happening going on in the workplaces, and we actually do not know. There are some pointers here that I put together, Dianne, and allow me very quickly to go through them. Some facts about sexual harassment in the workplace. The victim or the harasser may be a woman or a man. It's not every time it's going to be a man or a male figure. The victim does not have to be of the opposite sex. The harasser can be the victim's supervisor, an agent for that company, or even a supervisor of a different department, a co-worker, or even someone who is not employed by the company. You have someone coming into your company, right? The victim does not only have to be the person. The victim doesn't have to only be the person harassed, but anyone affected by the offensive conduct. So even a person standing next to me, or a person who might be within an area of hearing, right, automatically falls victim to that verbal form of harassment. And it is absolutely imperative that we know that this conduct it's always unwelcomed and unwanted. I believe in such a discussion, the imperative words there, the operative words there, are unwanted and unwelcomed. Forms of sexual harassment in the workplace may include some of the following: calling co-workers and colleagues derogatory names and making sexist comments, telling jokes and that are derogatory to women and those in the LGBTQ sphere or community, and also making comments that women do not belong in managerial or leadership positions, or other comments based on gender and other forms of stereotype. So there are a whole host and whole forms and different various forms of sexual harassment in the workplace. It is not just a touch or a word of a sexual nature. You know, while those are very pronounced, there are other forms of harassment that can be deemed sexual harassment in the workplace.
All right, thank you so much, Stephen. And this is an important conversation that we're having today, and as some of you viewers tuning in indicated, that it's a timely conversation. And we know that what's happening at the Cheddi Jagan International Airport, allegations at the moment, but it's important to have the conversation and dialogue for the education of our women, empowerment to speak up and speak out, and safeguard yourselves. And understand that there are trauma reactions when things like this happen. So please be sure to speak to someone when things like this are going on, whether it's HR. If you're not able to do that, please reach out outside their organizations that you could speak to. Or the bios of our women and myself, information will be on the Globespan page at the end of this segment. You could tune in and get that information from the segment. So please stay tuned with us. There's the second segment coming up at 2:30 with the CCJ ruling as of tomorrow. The final decision will be made. Not final decision, I think the official word for the CCJ will be coming out tomorrow. And Stephen indicated a good point. What's happening right now in this conversation, we need our politicians who are vying for the next election to put this at the forefront as well. Make this part of your agenda for your manifestos, for especially our women. So I'm hoping that, you know, for those of you who are tuning in, make sure you let them know that. So make your vote count. So again, I want to thank our guests, Audace Garnett and Michelle Nichols, again for joining us. And we'll see you again with Let the Women Speak back in our next segment. And so stay tuned at 2:30 for the upcoming CCJ discussion. We have some important guests on that segment. So thank you again, and have a pleasant afternoon. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks.